Good morning and welcome to week 2 of our exploration of the Lester Levy sheet music collection. This week I'll be looking at the temperance and prohibition movements. Temperance here, I'm referring to an organized movement against the consumption of alcohol, and prohibition referring to the 18th Amendment to the US Constitution as enforced by the Volstead Act that made it illegal to possess, create, or sell alcohol in the United States. While the temperance movement started in the 19th century and arguably still exists today, prohibition only lasted from 1920 to 1933. Now, one thing I would like to mention before I get started is that in looking at temperance, the issue of domestic abuse does come up. So please consider this a content warning that domestic abuse is mentioned in the lyrics of some of these songs. Now, the first song I'd like to take a look at is called Don't Sell My Father Rum. This was written in 1870, and it was published in New York by a woman named Nellie H. Bradley. Women were leaders in the temperance and prohibition movements, as they would often feel the effects of their husbands' overconsumption of alcohol, often financially and physically. There were organizations set up like the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which actually still exists today. These organizations were also connected to the suffrage movement. For example, we know that Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton founded the Women's State Temperance Society. So both of the anti-alcohol songs we're going to take a look at today are composed by women. Nellie Bradley had a religious background. She wrote many religious essays on temperance. Her goal was to, quote, warn the young against the seductive snares and dangerous pitfalls laid for the souls by the twin demons, alcohol and tobacco. She also wrote, quote, a majority of the criminals in our state prisons enter them under the age of 21 years of age, placed there by their own confession through the influence of strong drink, tobacco, and vicious literature. And I'm very curious as to what she was referring to by vicious literature there. She also wrote a lot of songs for kids. She wrote a song called An Hour with Mother Goose and Her Temperance Family. She wrote a song called A Temperance Picnic with the Old Woman Who Lived in the Shoe. I found advertisements for these songs. They were called entertaining and instructive for young people. So youth education was clearly very important to Bailey and in the temperance movement. And this song is actually written from the perspective of a child who is asking a presumed liquor salesperson not to sell alcohol to this child's father. So it's important to point out that Bradley only wrote the text for this song, not the music. Looking at the text, this child is begging. They're saying, I fear when he comes home tonight, he'll beat my poor mother and me. You'll notice that on the note, on the word beat, this note is elongated. It's longer than the other notes, and it has the word sostenuto under it, which means sustained in Italian. It's unclear to me if this choice was made by Bradley or by the composer of the music, or if it was a decision between them, but this technique of elongating and emphasizing this word was clearly used to heighten the emotional impact of the text. The line after this, she's waiting in darkness and cold, referring to this child's mother, implies to me that this family doesn't have any light or heat because the father is spending all of his money on alcohol. The following verse then brings in a religious argument. This child's mother is praying to God to save her husband's soul. But Bradley, I think, saves the heaviest emotional appeal for the last verse, which confirms that the song is being sung by a young girl, saying, you're angry because I have come, forgive a poor, sad little girl. Now, I was unable to find a recording of this song, but in trying, I actually found two other versions that have the same exact text that Bradley wrote, but a different melody. These were copyrighted in different years after this one, and Bradley is not credited in either of them, which tells me either that this was a copyright infringement, this text was stolen, or that Bradley possibly took this text to other publishers and composers to set it to music so that it would have a higher distribution. Now, the next temperance song I'd like to take a look at is called I'll Marry No Man If He Drinks. This is by Mrs. E.A. Parkhurst. This song is from 1866, 4 years before the previous one, and this is another oppositional response to alcohol consumption. It's this time from the perspective of a wife rather than a child. And now in trying to find information on Mrs. Parkhurst, I was only able to find an advertisement that mentions Mr. E.A. Parkhurst, as a sergeant that was killed in action, but the article doesn't mention the Mrs.'s first name. Now, the cover mentions who I presume to be her daughter, little Effie Parkhurst, singing this at the temperance meetings in New York and Brooklyn. As opposed to the previous piece, the music here was written by Mrs. Parkhurst, while the text was written by a Dexter Smith. I found it interesting that the first line of the text is, I know I may be an old maid, which I thought was interesting compared to the performer listed on the cover, little Effie Parkhurst, which sounds to me like a child. Maybe this was sort of a comic start to this song, this child singing, I know I may be an old maid. It's unclear to me if the temperance meetings mentioned on the cover are part of any specific organization. I think it's possible that they were part of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. This was a women-led organization that still does exist today, and it was very active along with the Anti-Saloon League in campaigning for prohibition. There are a few other peculiar things I found in the text. The second verse mentions a sphinx. I wasn't able to find any context around use of the word sphinx in the temperance movement, so I would be curious if anyone watching has any ideas. In the third verse, which I'll attach the PDF so you can take a look through the whole song, but the third verse mentions Miss Grundy, which is a character that dates back to a 1798 play called Speed the Plow by Thomas Morton. Mrs. Grundy is essentially a person that is controlling over the actions of others when it comes to convention, maybe a nosy neighbor, perhaps. So the author here is trying to say, don't give in to social pressure when it comes to alcohol. Musically, though, this is a very straightforward piece. It's not very difficult. It starts with a pretty upbeat introduction. It's got a little flourishy transition between the verses. There's really not too much drama. The only drama I was able to find is a fermata, or hold, over the word die, which I guess is dramatic in and of itself, but I'm not sure what it actually accomplishes here. So we're going to jump forward about 40 years in time to 1918, 2 years prohibition. The next two songs are oppositional response to prohibition. These are pro-alcohol songs. And this song is called Every Day Will Be Sunday When the Town Goes Dry. It's by W.M. Jerome and Jack Mahoney. On the cover, we have this very sad-looking man watching his poor beer fly away from him. He's sitting next to a rum hound, which is referring to a heavy drinker. This man is clearly dressed very nicely. He's classy. He's well manicured. And I wonder if the fact that he's sitting next to a rum hound is trying to make a distinction between the two. He's just a moderate drinker. He only wants this one beer that's flying away from him, as opposed to this dog that's sitting next to him in what looks like the gutter. This dog is drooling over alcohol. There is a period recording of this piece that I'll include in the OneDrive for what sounds like an orchestra. If you look at the bottom of the first page of music, you'll see that this was made available for talking machines. I did look up talking machines out of curiosity, and they appeared to basically be gramophones. It was also made available for player pianos, bands, orchestras, male quartets. Clearly, it was tried to be made widely available, and it was promoted for as much performance in public as possible. And there is what's called a vamp in this song. This is a section that one repeats over and over until the singer is ready to start. So typically the orchestra leader or the musician would have some sort of cue that it's time to exit the vamp and to move on. In my performing experience, the conductor will typically hold up a fist to indicate the exit, or the orchestra might be waiting for the singer to say a specific word to let them know that they're ready. Either way, this is an indication to me that this was designed to be publicly performed. In listening to the recording that I'll post in the OneDrive, you may notice that the singer is almost talking through the melody rather than actually singing it. I don't know if this was just a personal choice on the part of the singer or if it was the intention of the composer. I can say that the composer did something very clever here to facilitate this, and that is that they put the singer's melody in the piano part, so even if the singer isn't singing the melody and is just talking, you can still hear the melody underneath him. So you can see the text at the top there. We've got that D, C sharp for the words Mr. Prohib. And if you look in that red box underneath at the piano part, you'll see that the top notes are those same notes, D, C sharp, D, C sharp. And this is done throughout the entire piece so that the melody is always audible. This will cover the fact that the singer is just talking, and it will also help the singer get back on track when they decide to get back into the melody of the song. The text in the song was very fun for me to look up. There are so many references here to the brands and drinks that people enjoyed when this was written. We have a reference to John Barleycorn, which was a British ballad embodying barley. There's a reference here to Bromo Seltzer, which made headache medicine. And we still have the famous Bromo Seltzer Tower here in Baltimore. This song was published in New York, which was famously non-compliant with prohibition. I think by 1930, the police commissioner of New York estimated that there were around 32,000 secret bars or speakeasies in the city. And there's a very funny story I heard, I think in the Ken Burns documentary about prohibition, about a street that had so many speakeasies that one of the residents had to put a sign on her front door saying, "This is a private residence, please don't knock." There was a Bureau of Prohibition that hired agents to enforce the law and shut down these bars and speakeasies, but it was a highly corrupt and underfunded organization. So even if they were managed to, shut down, say, 100 bars in New York City in a day, the assumption was that 100 more would have sprouted up by the next day. Now, the last song I'd like to take a look at is another defiant song from New York in the collection. It's called America Never Took Water. This one a year later than the last in 1919. Water here is actually referring to water. This is not code for alcohol. This particular cover is dominated by a photo of Belle Baker, who was a famous singer and actress known mostly for her performances of Irving Berlin's music. But this was something very common in sheet music, putting famous people on the cover to catch your eye and give the song a marketing boost. It's also sort of, I think, an endorsement for the song because, if Belle Baker is singing it, clearly it must be a good song. Now, we actually have another edition of the song from the same year. You can see them both here. This one on the right shows an eagle defending New York City, although I guess technically New Jersey, from a vulture. Those of you in New York, I'm very curious to know in the Q&A where this illustration is taking place. Is this New York or is this New Jersey? This song also has a vamp, again indicating to me that it was meant to be performed publicly. Looking through the text, one lyric in particular caught my eye, and this was, "Of water in the trenches, we surely had our fill." This, I can only believe, is an emotional appeal referencing the recently ended First World War. Americans had heard and even continue to hear horror stories of trench warfare, so this surely hit a note with those listening. I also found a couple references to World War II in another song, The Alcoholic Blues, with lyrics claiming, quote, "I'd rather be in the trenches," and it claims that the government is performing amputations on alcohol consumption. So I'll go ahead and include a link to that song in the OneDrive as well. Now, there are 3 contributors to this song. They're all listed equally on the cover, so it's unknown which wrote the words and which wrote the music. I was only able to find extensive information on one of these, Gus Edwards, who was a song plugger. This was a very popular profession, especially for young people, who would be hired by publishers to promote songs. Part of the job was pitching songs to vaudeville stars, maybe backstage, to incorporate them into acts. I wouldn't be surprised if Belle Baker on the cover found this song through the work of a song plugger. These people would also be planted in the audiences at vaudeville shows when these would be performed. And when the performer would finish a song, this person would stand up and just pretend to be emotionally taken by the song and start singing the melody out loud back to them, which I really would have loved to have seen. I also found some advertisements for this song. My favorite came from New Orleans, and it simply says, "Be sure to hear this hit. It is another Prohibition song that will appeal to you." And I thought it was just so funny to think about how far advertisement has come. Now we have commercials that are 30 seconds to even 2 minutes long, but I'm just imagining a modern commercial in the vein of this one that's just maybe 3 seconds long, and it's a person saying, "Buy this product, it will appeal to you." Now, Prohibition eventually collapsed, of course, to a variety of reasons: lack of enforcement, corruption, and I'm sure that those in the 1920s who lived through Prohibition would be fascinated to know that 100 years later, during a global pandemic, that alcohol would actually be declared essential. But I wanted to thank you for joining this second installment. I've included my email here in case you'd like to send me any additional questions or comments. But I hope you have a great weekend, and I'm looking forward to Tuesday's question and answer.